Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. My name is Trent Gow, and I'm pleased to be co-moderator along with Geoff Solomon. This particular meeting is being broadcast by Rogers and will be rebroadcast, and it is also being rebroadcast by CFOS in Owen Sound. The first thing I'd like to say as moderators, our role is to manage the meeting and to facilitate, but our opinions will not be expressed, and it would be inappropriate to have partisan comments of any kind, and that will not happen. The second thing I'd like to say is that you, as the audience, thank you for coming. I would encourage you to support your candidates, but we do not want raucous behavior or inappropriate comments. And several debates I've been at recently, people have been asked to leave. We don't want that to happen, but we must respect our candidates. The third thing I'd like to do right now is to introduce those candidates before first me and then Geoff will make some opening comments about the format. So from my left, number one, I guess the seats were drawn in terms of sequence. So David McLaren, NDP, Larry Miller, Conservative Party of Canada, Kimberley Love, Liberal Party of Canada, Chris Albinati, Green Party of Canada. Those are your candidates. The next thing I'd like to say is thank you to each of the candidates. All of you who are involved in the campaign or are actively involved in coming to these kinds of meetings know how much time and effort and money and concern the candidates each put in. There will be one winner, but in my view, they're all winners. And I hope that you will express to all of them your thanks for their sacrifice, really, in serving the democratic process. And it's great, I think. The turnout tonight really is heartwarming in terms of that. I'm going to explain a tiny bit more about format and turn it over to Geoff. The first part of the evening will be opening statements. Each person will have 2 minutes. We have a timer seated by the mic, and she will flash a yellow card at 1 minute and 50 seconds. And I don't know if that's Celsius or Fahrenheit, one or the other. And then at 2 minutes, a red card, and we'll, unfortunately, to be fair, have to cut off. So that's the starting point. That will be followed by questions from the chambers, offered alternately by myself for the Owen Sound and District Chamber of Commerce and Geoff from the Meaford Chamber of Commerce. And then we'll change formats at halftime. We won't change ends. And Geoff will talk about that.
Okay, so in the second half is when we will open things up to the floor. We'll have questions from the audience, and you were given a chance to write out questions when you came in, or you were given a chance to get a ticket if you want to come up to the microphone. We will ask that your question be asked at the microphone in 30 seconds or less. We ask that you don't come up and give a speech. The speeches are for these folks over here. And the candidates will then be given 60 seconds to answer. If you want to have a question directed at a specific candidate, you can do that. Each of the others will then be given a chance to respond as well. Or if you want to just direct it at all 4 candidates, that works as well. And someplace on here, there's paper that tells me what I'm supposed to be saying. Any rate, so have I missed anything? No. No? That pretty much does it. Okay.
We have those as well?
We have those as well, yes.
So you're only subject to the draw, whether it gets chosen.
Yeah, the questions will be drawn at random. We'll alternate between questions that have been written out and questions from the mic. So we will call a number for the people coming up to the mic. We'll draw a question out of the basket, and they'll be completely at random. We'll get to as many as we can in the time allotted, but if we don't get to them all, I'll apologize in advance.
Great, thank you. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Mr. David McLaren to start. 2 minutes of an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Trent. Well, this is the first time that I have done this sort of thing, and apparently you're supposed to make promises if you're a politician. So let me make three. The first one is that I will do what I can to alleviate income inequality in this area and in the country. The second one is that my door will always be open to different points of view, and I will work hard to come to a consensus with those points of view. The third one is that I will call an economic summit, for lack of a better word, as soon as I'm elected, and pull together as many people who are able and who want to sit down and try to cobble together an economic plan for the region. Now, as you probably, thank you. All we have to do is kind of look around to see that this economy has not been kind to a lot of our friends and neighbors. The way that we have been doing the economy in the last 20 years really has not been working. Cutting back corporate taxes in the hopes that jobs will trickle down is not working. Cutting back on employment insurance and cutting back on healthcare transfers to provinces in order to balance budgets that are starved for revenue is not working. So we know that the top-down approach doesn't work, and this is one of the reasons why I'm running for the NDP, because we would like to try a bottoms-up approach. We would like to raise people's incomes to at least a living wage, because we know that people with money in their pockets are more likely to spend it in our neighbors' stores and shops. We would like to do $15 a day daycare, childcare, because we know that people who go through professional, safe,
Thank you.
child care
Sorry, no,
I'm sorry.
That's it.
Okay.
Larry Mel.
Just
Larry Miller.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to see a full house. I want to first wish my fellow candidates the best of luck tonight, and look forward to learning more about all of our policies. And I want to thank the Chamber for organizing this event. I've spent the last 11 years as your MP. I've taken a lot of pride in being a constituent MP. We won't always agree on different things, but I will tell you that I won't tell you something just because I think that's what you want to hear. I'll be honest with you, and that isn't going to change. Our party has had a number of announcements involving, so far in the election, involving everything from seniors to students and everything in between. And there will be more to come. And I look forward to answering questions on any of those and dispelling any myths or what have you that you may have about just about any issue. So thank you, and to the moderators, I'm going to leave it at that and look forward to questions.
thank you. The next speaker is Kimberley Love.
Hi, I'm Kimberley Love. I have actually been here before. I was here in 2011. This is my second time round. And I've been spending a lot of the time in between the last election and this one as a member of the Liberal Shadow Caucus, which has given me an opportunity to learn more about the communities that I propose to represent, and an opportunity to bring the voices of a community like this in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound to the policy making and to the table for the Liberal Party of Canada. In fact, voices from this riding have been heard in question period through the Liberal Party. So that's been a great honor. I come from the community of Hopeville. I grew up on a farm there. I was the second oldest of 8 daughters. My father's a farmer. My mother was an elementary school teacher, and I had absolutely no plan to be in politics. But life sometimes takes these funny turns. I saw what was happening in Canada under Mr. Harper, and I wasn't very happy, and I challenged myself to do something about it. And so here I am, and here's where I've been since July of 2009. I was asked to run Justin Trudeau's leadership campaign a couple of years ago when he ran for leadership of the Liberal Party. And there was a couple of things that I wanted to talk to him about. And one of the things, there's a couple of things that appealed to me. One was his passionate devotion to fairness in Canada. Another was the fact that in the 2 weeks after he announced his bid for leadership, he had 5,000 people who had volunteered to work on his campaign. 3,000 had never been involved in politics before, and most of them were young. And I thought, if there's anything that this country needs, it's the emergence of young people into the political discourse in this country. But I want to go back briefly to the theme of fairness. I'm sorry, is it 10 seconds, Geoff?
You're about done.
And we're going to be finished. Thanks.
Okay. And representing the Green Party, Chris Albinati.
Mabetsi Levi, Ta'ansi, Chris Albinati. I open with the introduction that my Isanai grandmother had taught to me, and I have the honor, even though I'm speaking last, I do have the honor of acknowledging that we are on the Anishinaabe territories, and so I thank them for letting us gather here, and that. Thank you. Now, Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound has many big issues facing it today, big issues that I don't think have been properly addressed. We have the harbor, we have our jobs and economy that need to be dealt with in a serious way. Students, we have 2 national parks, and yet the Conservatives since 2012 have been making deep structural cuts to the budget of Parks Canada. Those, I think, have a direct impact on us. And it also has a direct impact on tourism, which is a big thing here. The Conservative government cut the foreign advertising for tourism, while at the same time introducing millions of dollars worth of spending to advertise the Keystone XL pipeline in the United States, something that I think was a poor decision given where we are now. And of course we have many seniors, and there are serious issues about how are you going to stay in your homes, how are you going to remain comfortable, how are you going to age in place, something that we'll talk about tonight. So, but the biggest thing that I ran for is because I believe a single MP has a lot of potential. It can do a lot for its community, and I think Elizabeth May has a single Green MP, and the House has shown that in her term. Now, Larry Miller in 2010 with the National Post said, if you build up your hopes too high, you're bound to be disappointed. So I'm very happy as I am, and I think that is a sort of a wrong message to send to your constituents. I ran for the Green Party in this election because I want to do more for this country. I want to do great things for your community. I want to hold the government of the day to account for you and your interests. That's something that hasn't been done. Thank you.
Thank each of you. Just one comment, which is the timer's there. I don't want to interrupt it and sort of to tell you that. So if you could, to the best of your abilities, and I know the time is really short, just keep an eye out for the yellow or red card so that I don't have to do that, or not that I won't do it, but I'd prefer that you do it.
I like doing it.
We're now going into some questions that were developed by the 2 chambers with consultation. And I am going to ask the first question, which will be responded within 90 seconds by each of the candidates. And I'm going to start with Mr. Albinati. This concerns the Owen Sound Harbor. Does your party or do you have a vision, plan, and timetable to maintain and enhance the harbor? Specifically, will you maintain federal ownership and assume all costs to remediate? Will you assume all costs to remediate and then divest? Or will you divest and then provide funds for the new owners to remediate, even though the cost could be higher? What is your preferred approach?
Thank you. That's a good opening question. The harbor is a very complicated decision. We have reports from 2013 that showed that the approximate volume that needs to be removed is 75,000 cubic meters. That's almost 27,000 tons, which is a lot. That amount contains higher levels of lead, zinc, mercury, silver. So the report said the big problem is disposal, and the big problem is where are we going to put this? They said there's no safe place to put it, not on land, private or public, not in waters. And then the report on human health and ecological risk said the potential for unacceptable risk to human and ecological health is simply can't do it. Okay, so under the current laws, it just won't happen anywhere. What will the Green Party do? The Green Party's approach is about discussion. It's about consultation with the people who are being impacted. We have put forward a plan for a council of governments that brings together federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous leadership to discuss issues that directly impact all of those interests. If you dredge the harbor, you could end up impacting fisheries here, that are very close for the Chippewas and Nawash. So we need to think carefully. We need to trust the science. We need to invest in the science to make those decisions. This is something we haven't done. We need to remember that if we go forward, we need to remember the consequences. Again, that's a lot of material to take out. If you dredge it just for transit, then there's added costs always going forward. So it may seem like a good idea in the future, but the business case is not made.
Thank you. Kimberley Love?
Yeah, this is a thorny issue. I think what disappoints me most about the harbour issue is that we've been sitting on this for 10 years. The Goderich Harbour was cleaned up under a Liberal government in the past. This is federally owned. We have not been able to have a conversation about the future of our community. The difficulty, I think, is that we can't imagine a future. We don't know what the economy is going to look like if we have the harbour, if we don't have the harbour. So my understanding is that it can actually be dredged. It's going to be complicated. I think that the federal government has a role in stepping up to take on the responsibility for this. I think it's federally owned. This happened under federal watch. And I don't think that it's something that this community is going to be able to absorb on their own. But how do we sit down, and this is a question, for the Owen Sound City Council as well as for the communities of Grey County and Bruce County, how do we sit down and imagine what the next 10 or 20 years is going to look like if we don't know what's happening with the harbour? I feel as though our economic growth in this community has been stagnated and that we're spinning our wheels because we don't know what's happening with the harbour. I'm disappointed that Mr. Miller wasn't able to get that conversation going in the time that he's been in office.
Thank you.
Well, on the harbour, I think anyone that follows what goes on knows that the harbour is very important issue to me, something that I've spent a lot of time. Now, I agree with Ms. Love and the fact that, yes, the harbour needs done at whatever cost. I'm not sure from Mr. Albinati's comments that he really thinks that it should be dredged. But there are some issues. I'm not going to make excuses about it. It's on my plate. It's going to continue to be on my plate if I'm re-elected. And I just met with the Prime Minister on this very issue on September 18th, which was less than 2 weeks ago. And it's still there. The bottom line is that it needs to be a working harbour. Goderich was mentioned. Goderich is a harbour that pays its way, if I can say that. Owen Sound does not. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be dredged, but what it means is that you have to have a commitment from all of us involved to make the harbour multi-use, and that includes aggregate going out. And I just talked to two gentlemen yesterday that were concerned about the harbour not being dredged, but they put a stop up when it comes to aggregate. And if you want it to be a working harbour and a paying harbour that is going, everybody, including the community in the city of Owen Sound, has to get behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. McLaren?
Well, the bottom line of the harbour, of course, is the bottom of the harbour. It's thick with toxic waste down there. I can imagine why nobody wants to touch it, neither the federal government nor the municipal government, without some sort of liability. There are a couple of approaches to this, and one of them, of course, if you're going to do anything with the bottom of the harbour, you're going to have to consult with the First Nations. That's the law, and it is the UN Declaration on Aboriginal People that also guides us on that. They have, as Chris has pointed out, they have a key interest in what happens to the lake bottom, and in fact, they have a claim on the lake bottoms in this area. And so that has to be addressed. They have to be brought into the conversation. Now, if I were Owen Sound, while all the jurisdictions were kind of dithering one way or the other about what to do at the bottom of the harbor, I would be working to do something with the top of the harbor. I'm thinking of Toronto Harbourfront. I'm thinking of what it was like when I was down there, when I was living in Toronto. There was nothing more than a wharf and a couple of buildings. They put up ceramics for artisans. They had an art studio in there. Then they put up a theater. Along came a couple of cafes and a high-end restaurant. And if you look down there now, you will see the place is chock full of condominiums, and it's a thriving community all on its own. Let's take a look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you much. There are many prominent problems that affect the Canadian Armed Forces today, like the shipping program, the F-35, veterans care, poor pay, struggling military families. But there is one problem that outsiders do not see, but it is a very big problem. And it is the special measures and procedures that have been added to the normal budget rules. Procedures and practices supposedly to ensure that the further money is not wasted. Members complain that the enormous amount of time absorbed by these measures, the distraction from the important business, the long delays, even low-level matters like simple travel requests are signed off by top commanders. And the extra money spent in the end, because, for example, the delays lead to flight bookings that cost much more in the end. Some say the system would spend $100 to save $1. Others say that it's less about saving money than about the appearance of saving money. If elected, what would your party do to ensure the reform of such excessive and costly departmental procedures which would allow you to spend the money where it is most needed? And we'll start with Kimberley.
Well, that's very interesting, Geoff. I wasn't actually familiar with that, but I don't think that there's very many of us that would agree with spending $100 to save $1. And I know that in other areas, the Liberal Party are really committed to cutting down red tape and bureaucracy. I think that it's fair to say that we all know that there's a bit of an issue with the procurement processes with this government in any case. I think that you could probably look at our first strike fighter jet, our F-35 purchase, which has been going on and on and on, and has been absolutely ballooning in cost. I think that there are probably better, more thorough ways that we can be investigating where we're going to find savings and finding better places to put the money. As you probably are aware, Justin Trudeau has made a commitment that we're not going to be proceeding with the F-35s. We can think of other places to spend that kind of billions and billions of dollars. That has been the largest ticket item ever in Canadian procurement. So I guess that I would say that our party is looking at cutting the red tape, and that sounds like it's a very good place to start.
Larry?
That was a long and convoluted question, but in simple terms, our government not only is committed to cutting red tape, we have cut red tape in a lot of ways, and I'll tell you, we still got a long way to go. Anybody who has any inkling at all how the bureaucracy works, it's almost mind-boggling, and yes, there are some of them out there who would spend $100 to save $1. That's how ridiculous it is. And I think that any and all parties, I'm glad to see Kimberley support that, because it needs to be done. Now, as far as the procurement process, I'm not directly involved in it, but I'll tell you, all of us down there, it's a very frustrating file. It actually started in Chrétien's government, went through Martin's, and it's still in ours, and it's still not done. I believe it's closer today. But it frustrates people, and I think it's that lack of understanding in there how it can take this long. I'm as, I guess, disappointed as any, but we got to go. The one thing that veterans tell me all the time, and not just veterans, but people in the military, anytime I see them, that it has never been better in the military in the last 15 years as far as access to good equipment and that kind of thing. And that is a fact, and the
Thank
spending
you.
for the military. Thank you.
David?
Well, I think we've all seen enough reports from military folks to know that there are some military folks who would differ with that opinion. There's no question that procurement has become a real problem under this administration. It was not really very well done under the previous one as well. We have ships that don't float. We have planes that barely fly. We have icebreakers that don't exist that were supposed to be bought years ago. We have helicopters that are still almost too dangerous to fly. If you're going to put people into harm's way, then for God's sakes, give them the equipment that they need to protect themselves. I've kind of lost the thread of the question when it first came out, but it seems to me that it's part of the procurement problem. It's part of the bureaucratic problem, and it's not hard to solve. You sit down with your best people and you work out a procedure in which everybody knows what the rules are, and we can come to the, we don't have to spend $100 to get $1. But I think that this government has already committed itself in writing to take a look at the procurement process and to provide our troops, whether they're peacekeepers or war makers, with the best equipment that we can possibly afford.
Chris?
Well, Mr. Miller has demonstrated quite often what the Conservative government does, which is when they're given facts, then they assert exactly the opposite. The premise of the question was that there's a lot of red tape, and Mr. Miller says, well, our government has cut red tape. So I think we need to start by listening to the experts, and when people say, the F-35 isn't the best plane to buy, we don't just push full bore ahead and stop at nothing to keep purchasing that airplane. But part of that question was also about struggling families and veterans, and this is where the Green Party really has a good platform in terms of increasing the funding for PTSD and reversing the damage that has been done by the new Veterans Charter. We have evidence that shows service dogs reduce PTSD in 82% of cases. This is things that we can do to help the people when they come back from being put in harm's way. We need to put an end to the categorization of veterans according to areas of service, and fundamentally part of the Green Party's platform in terms of veterans in the military is to scrap the lump sum payment, reinstate lifetime pensions and monthly compensation. There's a lot that we can do for our people in service, and I want to do it for the people of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound who are brave enough to serve. Thank you.
Thank you all. The next question involves something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. It's quite current these days. I wondered, and it's a two-part question, will your party support this agreement if it involves concessions that will weaken Canada's supply management system for milk and milk products, poultry, and eggs? And more locally, what steps would your party take to protect those farmers in Grey County and Grey and Bruce counties who are impacted by such an agreement? And I'll start with Mr. Miller.
Thank you. A good question, and I'm glad that it came up. The TPP is a trade agreement that it is not an option for Canada not to be in it. 40% of the world's trade will come under this agreement once it's in place. And as for the timing, if you want to believe the rumors, it was supposed to happen 6 months ago, and the rumors are out there now that it could happen this week or next. But one thing that I want to point out is that our government has signed 39 trade agreements with 39 different countries, and in each and every one of those we have protected supply management. Our record stands on it. And will there or could there be minor variances to supply management in the dairy industry? Of course there could. It could be. But anything that's out there, the Prime Minister announced, I believe it was before the election, that any concessions that may be made under supply management there would be compensation involved. And in discussions that I've had, I have no fears about what's going to come out of it. Myself, from an agriculture background, I'm probably the only member of Parliament who has been in both the dairy, the supply management and non-supply management, and I've got input in there constantly, so thank you.
Thank you. David McLaren?
Well, as you may know, I've asked Mr. Miller a number of times in the media what his government plans to do, and the answer that comes back, not only from Mr. Miller but from the government, is trust us. I'm sorry, I don't. We would not support such an agreement if it was signed and the supply management was thrown under the bus. We are already on record to say that we would protect supply management in these kinds of deals, and I don't care what the government says. Even if 10% of supply management goes down, that's a huge amount, enough to cripple the industry. The compensation, if the government pays compensation to supply management farmers for what they're signing, is going to be huge. It's going to be in the order of billions of dollars, and it will put farmers out of work. There's nothing wrong with supply management. We've had this supply management, this way of doing business that we have chosen to do for ourselves for a number of years now, and it has produced a good livelihood amongst some farmers in an area that has a shortage of good livelihoods. There is so much that reeks about this agreement, quite frankly, and this is only the tip of the iceberg. If you want to go into further, you got to look at what's going to happen with the auto pack. If you want to go further, you got to look at what happens to pharmaceuticals. The price of pharmaceuticals will go up with this agreement. So this is a secret agreement, and which is objectionable to the democratic process, and probably illegally signed, since this is a caretaker government.
Thank you. Mr. Albinati.
So I'm a lawyer, and I've done some international work, and I've studied international law, so I can tell you that what these agreements do is effectively they undermine our sovereignty. They sell out bits and pieces of our ability for our government to do things for Canadians. And that doesn't mean just protect them, but that's also about ensuring that our industries remain safe and able to thrive. These are not only bad for producers, but they're bad for consumers. Let's take one example that all three parties to my right have voted for in the House, and that Mr. Miller spoke very prominently on, which was the Canada-Korea trade agreement. Mr. Miller said in September 24th, 2014, speaking in favor of the bill, that if producers of Canada were not protected under this deal, this government would not sign it. And he also said continued success of the agriculture and agri-food sector is heavily dependent on an ability to compete in international markets over the long term. But again, think about what this deal is doing. And think about the way it's happened. This deal gives certainty to foreign investors so that governments of today and of the future can't do anything to make those investments uncertain. So I ask Mr. Miller, and I ask the Conservative government, why are the interests of foreign corporate and private investors more important than the interests of the people of this county, of the people of this country, okay? Why are they? Because that's what's happening. Why do this deal in secret? Mr. Prime Minister said himself, there's thousands of interests at stake. Why haven't they been consulted? That's bad government.
Thank you. Kimberley Love.
Well, I guess I find myself somewhere in the middle. We're a nation of exporters. I come from a farm as well, and it is important that we have certain trade deals. My contention with the TPP and the other trade deals that this Conservative government has signed, this is not a partisan comment, it's about the particular style of this government, is that they're doing it in secret. It used to be that in trade negotiations, you would bring in people from other parties, you would bring in experts. It was a much more open process. In one of the trade agreements, Wayne Easter tells me he found out about it when Jerry Ritz tweeted. And I don't think that that's an acceptable way or a respectful way to treat other people in government. I'm also disappointed that this is happening during a caretaker government. Traditionally, when you're in the writ period, you would not sign anything that would bind a future government. We've all taken a look. We've all taken a look at the polls. There is absolutely no certainty whatsoever that Mr. Harper is going to be the Prime Minister after this is over, or that we're going to have another Conservative government. The hands of a future government are going to be tied by what happens with TPP if it happens this week. I actually don't agree with Mr. McLaren about supply management being perfect the way it is, but it's a great system that has provided remarkable stability for farmers. It's worth a couple of fixes, and I think that that's the work that I'd like to see happen in the next government, and I'd like to participate in that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apparently my last question was too long. So, in the current electoral system, the political party with as little as 36% of the popular vote can be elected with a majority government. Do you support the current electoral system? And if you do, why? And if you don't, what would your party do to reform it? And we'll start with Chris.
Good question. Well, as many people know, the Green Party supports proportional representation, some form of it. That means changing our electoral system so that your vote counts when you cast it, so that if you're part of the other 54 or 64% of the country that cast a ballot and it ended up not counting, you can go cast your ballot with confidence knowing that it's going to mean something. Now, in this room alone, if you look to your right and you look to your left, one of those people didn't vote statistically in the last election, and I think that represents a deeper problem with our democracy. It represents a deeper problem with engagement in the issues, and I think that problem is largely attributed to the hyper-partisanship that we see in the House of Commons all the time. Now, it wouldn't be so bad if a government got in with 36% of the vote. We can talk about why it doesn't represent everybody, but if that government was cooperative, if they were willing to talk to people, if they were willing to engage with the people across the aisle and actually listen to the debates that were happening in the House of Commons, which is a structure that's designed for that, debating the issues, representing all people, then maybe our first past the post system wouldn't be such a problem. But the fact is that we've had the last 4 years of a majority Conservative government doing nothing but thumbing its nose at the majority of Canadians, and that is a problem. That is what calls for electoral reform, and so I think electoral reform is necessary and must start day one after the election.
Kimberley.
Well, one of the questions that I asked Justin Trudeau when I was running his leadership campaign is where he stood on electoral reform, because I said this strategic voting thing, this is killing us. Canadians need to be able to vote their conscience, and they need to be able to see their point of view represented. And he issued that. He said, well, not only am I not in favor, he says that's actually my electoral platform. That's why I'm running for the leadership of the party. And it goes to that issue of fairness that I touched on in my opening remarks. Beyond making a commitment that this is going to be the last first past the post election in Canadian history, he has committed to putting together an all-party committee to take a look at what the alternatives would be to first past the post and to implement within 18 months of a Liberal government forming after the next election. He goes beyond that, though. He also talks about the hyperpartisanship of the current situation in Ottawa and how damaging that's been to our democracy. So he's got a 32-point plan, actually, for democratic reform. You can find it on realchange.ca. Among other things, it also calls for more free votes. What has happened is that we've got this tight control and command style in the House in which members are voting with their party rather than voting for their constituents. Justin Trudeau has made a personal promise to me. I'll have to vote with the party for the budget and for matters with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Beyond that, my job is to represent the constituents of this riding.
Larry?
The answer to your question is, until we have a better system that's proposed, yes, I support the present system very much. And one thing that I will not support in any proportional representation that's been talked about so far that I've been shown is it involves appointed names by parties who ultimately could turn into being MPs that aren't actually elected. And I will not support any system that will do that. All you have to do is look what goes on in our Senate. The Prime Minister of the day gets to appoint senators. Yeah, it is. That's right. And you could end up with the same type of fiasco if that's what you want. So I support the present
Please
system.
be respectful.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As far as partisanship in the House, the two previous candidates are right. It's terrible there. I am not a partisan guy by nature, never have been. And it's up to Mr. Moderator, do I have the floor? Or? And
yes.
I am not a partisan guy by nature. It's the nature of the House. It gets there. But it's something that we all have an individual responsibility, and I do my part on that as much as possible.
Thank you.
David.
Well, as Tommy Douglas said, the best way to protect democracy is to practice it. And it hasn't been practiced for quite some time. So, yes, the NDP 2 years ago, or if not longer, has opted for mixed member proportional representation, which, as you may or may not know, is a way simply of not only returning somebody at first past the post, like one of us, but also voting for a regional MP in proportion to the votes that you cast. So your votes count, and the regional MPs will be named. They will be on the ballot, they will be open, and they will be nominated by a democratic process. They will not be appointed, just necessarily appointed by the party. We have to find another way of getting our folks, our members into Parliament. Clearly, when you have Conservative government forming a majority government with only less than 40% of the popular vote, you've got a problem. When you've got a Liberal government, as you do in Ontario, the same thing, that's a problem. When you have an NDP government in Alberta that forms a majority government with less than 40% of the vote, then you have a problem. It seems to me a no-brainer. It seems to me that every party would be in favor of this.
Thank you. The next question is on the subject of infrastructure. It's a tiny bit long, but I'll try to be clear. Canada faces a huge infrastructure deficit. We see this, all of us, all the time. Crumbling bridges, roads, crowded buses or infrequent buses, and lack of social housing. Municipalities own 60% through some of the offloading of our country's infrastructure, but collect just 8 cents of every tax dollar paid by Canadians. If elected, what dedicated long-term sustainable federal infrastructure funding will your party provide to municipalities to close this gap? And I'll start with Kimberley.
I always get the complicated questions first.
Yeah, I apologize.
That's all right. The infrastructure question is a good one for the Liberals. As people know, Justin Trudeau has made it very clear that he intends to run 3 small deficits in a row and then balance the budget. The reason he's doing that is because he believes that we need infrastructure investment. We've got a $171 billion deficit gap. That deficit in our infrastructure, that deficit is as real to our kids as a fiscal deficit on a budget line. We know, and my husband and I were one of those houses in Owen Sound that was on a hose from mid-February until the end of May. We know that we've got an infrastructure deficit here in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. The commitment of the federal government, of a Liberal government, would be to commit $60 billion in the next 10 years in 3 baskets. The first one would be for public transit. The second one would be for social infrastructure, including affordable housing. And the third one would be for a green infrastructure, which would include things like climate change mitigation. So that is in 3 baskets of $20 billion, a $60 billion commitment to infrastructure. The reason why we're doing it, right now the timing is good. Interest rates are low. The deficit of infrastructure is sitting there for us to deal with. And frankly, communities like Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound are not going to be able to proceed unless we have the foundations for economic growth.
Mr. Miller.
It goes without saying about the infrastructure deficit, and we just created the longest and longest 10 years and largest infrastructure program in the history of Canada, and that involves $53 billion between provincial and territorial governments, and including municipal. One thing that when I was in municipal government, And anybody here that was worked in municipal government, one of the biggest issues that we had was the gas tax fund. It was inconsistent. You never knew from year to year, are we going to get it or not? Well, not only do we get it every year now, we made it a permanent gas tax fund. And for example, all the municipalities in the riding this year are getting $7 million, $783,000 just out of the gas tax fund. That does not include regular infrastructure funding that you can apply for. There was a big announcement in Meaford not that long ago that to extend water and sewers into an area that needed it. Owen Sound is currently under a big infrastructure water and sewer project. Those all come under there, and then you can name dozens of other projects that have came through there. Is it enough? I don't think it'll ever be enough, but we are committed to trying to deal with it.
Thank you. Mr. McLaren?
Well, no question infrastructure funding is really important. Kimberley is now talking about social housing as infrastructure, which is about time because they canceled the federal government out of social housing back in 1993. The NDP would put $2 billion towards social housing to boost the number of units available. But you know, the difficulty with infrastructure funding is that it is a very strong bit of medicine. It helped get us out of the Depression back in the 30s, and it helped us get us out of the recession. But to apply it as a deficit year after year after year in the economic growth that we're experiencing, I think is pretty risky. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has said that the world's growth will proceed at less than 4% a year, and Canada's growth over the foreseeable future will be 2%. So once you've done your deficit funding and racked up a debt of, as I calculated, some $30 billion, will you have the economy to help you get out of the hole? And the question I have is I don't think you will. I think that deficit funding for infrastructure right now is a risky thing. What you need is consistent funding for infrastructure, and that means adequate taxes at the municipal level, and that comes from good jobs. And so once again, we're back to the bootstraps up or the bottoms up kind of economy that we talked about earlier.
Thank you. Mr. Albinati.
I find it interesting that part of Mr. Miller and the Conservative government's plan includes making permanent a tax on gasoline, which is something that all of us have to purchase. And so, you know, to do that sort of downloads the costs on the people, everyday people who are consuming these products. We need to think seriously about community infrastructure. Our numbers show that there's a $300 billion deficit in infrastructure. That's why the Green Party wants to invest $6.4 billion a year into municipal infrastructure, including part of which is a $1 billion a year green tech fund for innovation and emerging tech, allowing communities to spend some of that money to hire youth to address major projects in their communities. It's been said, and it was said, I think the other day by Mayor Naheed Nenshi, who's the mayor of Calgary, Alberta, that a plan for the economy that doesn't include cities is not a plan for the economy. We need to invest in cities. There's crumbling infrastructure. People can't live if the cities are not livable.
Thank you.
There's constant turmoil within the world causing the need to accept immigration from various countries. History, however, has shown that a massive immigration into one country can cause significant social unrest. If elected, how would you structure an immigration policy that would allow refugees to immigrate to Canada with minimal effect on the social fabric? And we'll start with David.
Well, the NDP will look at the families, first of all, on an ongoing basis, so that if you've got family over here, then you should be able to bring your family members into the country. But now we're seeing something different. We're seeing a mass migration of folks out of troubled zones into countries that clearly are not either wanting them or can cope with them. We have an obligation, I think, as we did with the Vietnamese and the Cambodians back in the 1980s, to take more than we're taking. You know, for this government, for Mr. Harper, one refugee is not enough. But for the world, 10,000 is not enough. One refugee is too many, and for the world, 10,000 is not enough. We do have to step up in this particular instance.
Thank you. Larry. Switch it up. Larry?
He said he was going to
Do you not
switch
go
it
to
off.
the other end?
No, it's your turn.
Okay, my apologies.
Don't start
Okay.
the clock.
You're switching rotation, okay?
Yeah, well, once in a while, we got to make things
We're trying to
lively.
entertain
Okay,
the audience.
that's fine, Mr. Moderator. I wasn't aware you were going to do that, so.
Thank you.
As far as immigration, this country was built on immigrants coming in here, and we still need good immigrants. I've had people say to me, well, because of some of the issues out there, that we should stop immigration, and we should never do that. But, with the constant, or with the issue that's going on in Syria and what have you, and the flood of refugees into Europe, Canada is doing its share. And but prior to when this issue broke, the Prime Minister 2 or 3 weeks before that had said that we're going to take many more refugees. But I'll tell you, we will not take them without them properly being screened first. And that has to be done. I want all of you in this room to feel safe, but for me, it's about my kids, my grandkids, and their kids. And we have to do that. We just have to do it right. And as far as our numbers of immigration, a lot of people confuse the refugee and the immigrant issue. And they are two different things. Refugees come in here, they're fleeing something that's driving them out of there. But the one thing that we cannot do here is forget that we have to address the problem on why there are so many refugees flooding into Europe. And we will be there to try and deal with ISIL. That's where the problem is.
Kimberley.
I just wasn't sure. Okay, I think that the conversation about immigration has kind of morphed over to refugee, and those are two separate issues. But let's talk about the refugee thing. I think that it is astonishing that a photograph of a baby on a beach appears in the media, and that Mr. Harper's solution is more bombs. I don't think that that's appropriate. I think that we've got a more compassionate country than that. Mr. Harper talks about bringing in refugees. In fact, they've only brought in 2,300 refugees since the Syrian crisis started. The Liberal Party is committed to bringing in 25,000 refugees as early as possible. If that sounds like a large number, we should remember that we settled successfully 60,000 Vietnamese boat people in 1979. They were easily absorbed. We're a generous country. We're a tolerant country. When those people come in, by the way, and are waiting with their refugee status, one of the things that Mr. Harper's government has done is to take away their health care. We have pregnant women who can't get care. That is not the Canada that I know, and if we go back to our issue of fairness, I think that we can do better than this.
Chris.
Well, they were talking about it on the news the other day, that we have an aging workforce, that people over 65 outnumber those who are under 15. So we have a problem there, and immigration needs to be a grown-up discussion about dealing with realistic issues like that. It can't just devolve into this sort of xenophobic, back and forth about, security and refugees, people who are struggling in the world's most struggling people. Now, my family, my grandfather's an architect, my grandmother's an educator. They immigrated here from the Philippines back in 1966, and my mother came along with them. So I understand how immigration works in that context. I've sort of lived through it, through those histories. Now, the Conservative government, their policy has been to discourage as much refugees and immigration as possible. They did things like advertising in Hungary, directly targeting the Roma to say, don't even bother coming to Canada, we're just going to send you back anyways. So Mr. Miller is right, and I will agree with him, that this country was built on immigration. But we've forgotten what this country is built on when we don't even reflect our Canadian values abroad. That is something that is a huge problem with the policies of today. And so when we're talking about immigration, we need to take a step back from the rhetoric, and we need to remember that things like skilled laborers, other people who are struggling, can come to this country and safely fit in with us, knowing that our values are diverse, our values are embracive. That's the Canada that we should return to, not this Canada of fear.
I have another question with a tiny bit of preamble, and it concerns daycare. The OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, ranks Canada near the bottom among developed countries in terms of access to and public funding of early learning and child care spaces. They recommend that significant public priority should be given to funding invested in Canada to create a universal or some kind of broader child care system so that this can lead to full employment, gender equity, and enhanced development and learning for young children. That's the OECD speaking, not me, and they'd be more articulate than I am. If elected, what programs would your party implement, and how much sustainable funding would you provide towards early learning and child care spaces nationally? And Chris, I'll start with you.
Well, yes, I'm a parent. I'm 30 years old. I'm a parent with 2 young children. So I know how difficult it is to actually find childcare, let alone find the money to pay for it. The Green Party is committed to providing high-quality, federally funded care and early child education programs, but we go beyond that. We talk about creating tax incentives for employers to create workplace child care spaces. There have been a number of studies shown that the relationship between the mother and the child are so much better when they're going to the same location in the morning, when those two things are combined. So this plan also addresses some of the gender biases that exist often in the workforce when we're discussing child care. We need to find ways to address that. We talked again in the last question about an aging workforce and how are we going to replace that. Well, if more women are joining the workforce in that way, and we encourage them to do so, and we want them to, then we have to be stripping away those gender biases. Some of the gender biases, as inherent in the sort of income splitting plan, where the assumption is that one of the other goes to work all day and the other one, so that we can balance it out and make it even for the families, as they keep saying it. So childcare needs to be a priority. We need to have a national daycare plan because families deserve it.
Thank you. Kimberley Love.
Yeah, so I'm a mother of 4, so I totally get this one as well. What's really interesting to me is that, the House of Commons is one of the worst workplaces in the country in terms of childcare and friendliness to women employees. So that's something that, Agnes MacPhail maybe got started on in 1921. But as recently as 1993, a woman missed a vote in the House of Commons because she couldn't find a woman's washroom. So they're a long way from getting the kind of childcare even in the House of Commons that we deserve. Happily for the Liberals, the $20 billion that has been set aside in our infrastructure investment under social infrastructure is including childcare. Our plan would not be universal. It would be progressive. It would be for the families that need it the most. Our commitment is to provide high quality, accessible, and affordable daycare wherever you live in the country, and that includes rural communities like Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. I was deeply disappointed when Harper first took government. There was a child care program that had been put together by Ken Dryden. We were ready to put spades in the ground down in Southgate Township, and that program was one of the very first casualties when Mr. Harper took office. So we'll be delighted to get that back on the road so women can participate fully in the economy.
Thank you. Larry Miller.
That child care program that Ms. Love just mentioned, you should know that under the Paul Martin government, in the first stages of that so-called program, $70 million approximately went to the government of Ontario to set it up. Not one daycare was created. They spent 3/4 of that money studying the issue and banked the rest. And so it didn't turn out. Our party and I support, or do not support, right across the board. I do, however, support child care that is there for single mothers, for disadvantaged people who don't have other options. But our universal child care benefit puts $2,000 a year in parents' pockets for each child 6 years of age and under, and between $600 and $700 for those up to the age 18, or up to the age 17, sorry. And that's the way that moving forward that we will do it. It gives parents the choice. They decide. Why shouldn't it be mom and dad who decides where their kids go? My wife and I made a choice to raise our kids in a certain manner, and we didn't have it. It wasn't in an institution. It was done through us, and I just don't think it's the way to go. Quebec is already moving away from that.
Thank you. David McLaren.
Well, I always love it when the Liberals invoke Agnes McPhail because, as you may know, she was an original CCFer, which turned into the NDP. But neither the Liberal nor the Conservative scheme for daycare, which is basically to give cash to people to buy daycare, is going to work because the cash that they give is not nearly enough for daycare, not nearly enough. So it's the NDP that has the only program. It's already costed out, it's planned out, ready to go, hit the ground as soon as we're elected. And it is, of course, a universal child care program. One that will provide 1 million spaces over a number of years. It will cost a bunch of money over a number of years, but there's lots of evidence to show that some of that money comes back because women enter the workforce and their incomes then become taxed. And also because you're creating jobs. You know, you need to hire people to staff a good quality daycare, and that means that those folks will also enter the workforce. So the pluses for a daycare program, a universal daycare program that we're planning, are multitude. And in fact, if you look at successful countries who've made it through the recession and still dealt with poverty, they have three things. They have a good universal health care program, they have a good universal child care program, and they have free tuition. We will have two of those.
Thank you.
Okay, we had one more question. However, because we want to give you in the audience a chance to ask as many questions as we can, and we only have an hour left, we're going to skip the last question that we had and move on to you folks. I'll start by drawing a number, and we'll ask the number holder to come up and ask a question, and then we'll draw a question. Please, as I said, you've got 30 seconds for your question. The candidates will have 60 seconds to answer. Be brief and make it good. And we're going to start with, how many of these numbers do I need to read? The last three?
Read them all.
Read them all. Okay, I've been told. 0112162.
Please speak to the mic.
This is turning into a retirement community. Retired people have to have somebody looking after them. If there's no culture, there's no entertainment for young people, there's no internet available for young people, how are you going to keep them here? So it's about employment. What are you going to do to keep the people here, to look after the old people that are coming here to retire?
And we'll start with Chris.
Well, that's a good question, the young and the old, and where do they meet in the middle? The Green Party is proposing a guaranteed livable income. That's a living wage for everybody who's over 18. And that means that whether you're a senior in your home, you know, in poverty, or whether you're a young man or woman at home, you know, you have enough money to make sure that you're not starving, to make sure that you don't have to leave this area to go find work. We think that a guaranteed livable income is one of those cornerstone policies that allow communities to stay together rather than to be split up. For seniors, again, I talked about it earlier on, but aging in place. We need to talk about ways of finding seniors and old people to stay in their homes where they're most comfortable, where they're going to be the most happy, where they're the most familiar. I saw it with my grandparents when they moved from their home into a caretaker facility. They lived on a farm for over 40 years, and then suddenly they're in a caretaker facility, and that was just devastating for them.
Thank you. Kimberley.
All right, well, I agree. I think we need a very diverse society, and the Liberals have taken a look at expanding compassionate care leave so that people can care for seniors in their home. But I think Peter's question was really more to how do we keep young people here? The way we keep young people here is with jobs. We need infrastructure investment so that we can create the economic foundation to actually create the jobs. We've got infrastructure assets like a harbor that needs to be dredged, like an airport in Wyerton, an international airport that needs to be modified to keep its status. And we need rural broadband. I don't know how we imagine that we are going to get economic development in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound if we do not have broadband, probably fiber in the cities and rural broadband as well. I think, though, that in terms of an immediate fix, our Fairness for Families package is probably going to help to equalize the income and make a difference here.
Thank you. Larry.
The question is, how do we keep our young people here? By the year between 240 and 250, it's predicted that out of every 7 people, only 2 of those will be working age people to keep, and that's something that's got to be addressed down the road. But as far as jobs, a fact that a lot of people don't know is that out of all the jobs in Canada, 82% of them are created by small and medium-sized businesses. And creating a climate, a government creating a climate for businesses to thrive, to expand, and of course when they expand they hire other people. That's the way that we have to go. Government always does a poor job of creating jobs, but if they give businesses, the private sector, a chance to do that and the right tools, they will do it in spades.
David.
As much as I like to see the Red Party campaign from the left, I would really like to see Mr. Miller's party campaign from the left. It was the NDP actually that put a motion on the floor to cut small business taxes from 14 or 11 down to 9%, and it ended up in Mr. Harper's budget. But the question is jobs, and one of the things that we need to start thinking about is how we do the economy, how we do jobs differently. I'm not sure that the manufacturing sector is going to come back in big time as it has in the past. And the auto sector, kind of canary in the coal mine, is an indication of that. So the NDP would like to put some money, resources, and some stimulus money into creating an innovative economy. And that means bringing up design engineers. It means bringing up a whole bunch of people who can create jobs. And if you have jobs that are being created, good, paying, interesting, technical jobs, the young people will then be able to stay here.
Thank you. So the alternate format that we're also asking questions was online so that people who are not here, perhaps watching or listening, could submit questions. Sometimes the premise are ones that I don't know. I mean, they're the questioner's premise, so I'll just read the question. This came from an online source. Canadians subsidize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of $1.3 billion per year, despite the fact that the industry is in a downturn which has destabilized our economy. Will you end these subsidies and encourage a transition to clean technology economy? If so, how? And we'll start with David McLaren again.
The answer is yes. The NDP will put a cap on carbon and introduce a cap and trade system, which will bring down emissions. We will end subsidies, direct subsidies, such as the one that was just quoted, to fossil fuel agencies. And we will stimulate innovation again in the green sector. So there's 3 things: capping trade, capping carbon, allowing companies to trade emission credits so that there's an economy growing there, stimulate the green technology, and retrofit, also an ecological retrofit to houses, which will also help to stimulate the building industry.
Thank you. So we're now thoroughly confused as to who should go next. I'll ask Chris.
Well, Mr. Miller, said it well. 82% of jobs are created by small business, which again, connecting to the premise of the question, makes you wonder why billions of dollars are going to fossil fuel corporations, which are by no means struggling at all. The Green Party thinks that the equation is wrong on that front. We believe in introducing a cap and dividend, which is different from a carbon tax credit or something like that, or a carbon tax. The cap and dividend means that for every ton of carbon that's brought out of the ground, a dividend is distributed to every Canadian. Because if these are resources that belong to all Canadians, then the wealth of those resources should belong to all Canadians. So when you think about how this works in practice, that money also stimulates the 82% of small businesses that are responsible for creating jobs. It also goes to helping families, whether it's two-parent families or single-parent families, you know, do things like continue to survive and feed their children.
Thank you. Kimberley Love.
Well, we're all in agreement on this one. We would also end immediately fossil fuel subsidies. It was part of a G20 pledge that our country has made, and we're on track for that, and we'll continue it. Justin Trudeau is on record as saying that he's putting a price on carbon. But beyond that, he has taken a Medicare approach to climate change. So his idea is we have a government currently that doesn't do a very good job of playing nice with the provinces. In order to get the kinds of solutions that we need on climate change, we need to have the Government of Canada sitting down with the provinces and the territories to hammer out the details. We will be making an immediate investment of $300 million into green tech and clean tech. And I think that I'd like to see some of that money come to Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. This is a wonderful opportunity. We've got money set aside in our social infrastructure basket for a green tech incubator. Let's bring it here.
Thank you. Larry Miller.
The Prime Minister has already committed to banning the building of coal-fired generators. Canada is the first country, this government is the first government to actually reduce greenhouse gases. It's been talked about for a long time, and that's...
Please, let him speak.
Read the facts. And anyway, that's... and we're committed to doing that. One thing that you have to remember, that if you do it in a manner that harms your economy, which some people would like to do, shut down every car, train, plane, automobile. You can't do that. You can do it, in segments and reduce it, and our commitment is there to do that.
Thank you. It's time for another number.
The last three numbers, given I think that's all I need to do, is 163.
I have spent time in Europe working in the various packing houses, and I have seen very little Canadian fruit going into the UK. Box after box is coming in from Washington State of red, delicious apples. The market's there. Why aren't we there?
Thank you. Who are you addressing this to? Each of them?
To all of them, yeah.
We'll start with Larry.
I think the question was, sir, you said Canadian fruit?
Yes.
Is that what well, under the new Canada-Europe Free Trade Agreement, that could quite possibly change. Remember that in our climate here, the fruit that we grow, we're limited to the time of the year. It isn't. We're fortunate we live in an area here, Georgian Bay apples. Everyone knows them, and they're all, we ship them all over the place. But we got to build those markets over there. And with a free trade agreement with whatever country gives you the opportunity to do that. And I don't know whether it's country specific, but I know that there's products, all kinds of agricultural products that ship out of Canada here all over the world. And I would have assumed that Britain was one of them.
Kimberley.
Oh, this is such a good question. A couple of years ago, I was doing a little bit of shopping in Collingwood, and I was picking up some apples, and I went looking for some Canadian apples. I'm in Collingwood, right? In October, couldn't find any Canadian apples. And as I was driving home past Meaford, I saw some of the farmers rolling up their apples for compost because there was no market. I see that Philly is here. We've got a real issue with local food. We can't even sell it in our own stores, let alone getting it to Europe. So I'm a big proponent of trade deals that take our wonderful products, Canadian products, to the rest of the world, but we need a local food processing. We need a complete revamp of our food system to ensure the security of our food and the health and well-being of our farmers.
Chris? Go ahead, Chris.
Me?
Yeah. Why not?
Well, I mean, I have to point it out again that I don't understand why somebody says in the premise of a question that I've been on the ground and I've seen this and I know that there's a market for this product, and then Mr. Miller says, well, we got to go build the markets there by increasing trade deals and things like that. It just seems strange. There may be very many complicated reasons why our apples don't make it to Europe and Washington apples do. That could very well have to do with things like the NAFTA free trade agreement. There could be clauses in there that make it more difficult for local producers here to compete with much larger scale producers in the United States or larger scale producers in foreign countries. We need to remember that when we open up with these trade deals, this so-called free market, that we put at risk the smaller people in front of the bigger people. You know, that's what that whole free market means.
David?
I'm not sure why you need a free trade agreement to sell apples to the United Kingdom. It seems to me something that you would do anyway. It seems to be something that a government could pave the way for. There are lots of bilateral agreements between Canada and other countries like Japan that do open markets. Why it has to be a free trade agreement, I'm not sure. The whole idea of not being able to sell our apples even to ourselves is ludicrous. And so the NDP has a farm strategy, an agricultural strategy, part of which will be opening up those avenues between the farm and our local forks. The other thing about produce, of course, is that a lot of the produce is, a lot of the business is done with a handshake, more or less, and so that people will grow things, they will send things down to the United States, for example, and suddenly they don't get paid. There is a mechanism in the States to protect their farmers. We don't have it here. The federal government has been missing in action in that, and the NDP would bring that in.
This next question was again submitted online. Mr. Miller, it's addressed to you, and the others can comment as they wish. The CBC was created to give TV to the poor and remote in Canada, the question says. This government has taken ours away. The question says, you did nothing to protect us. Why not? What will the other parties do to restore our CBC? Is it true that the property of the CBC is being sold off at this very time? So, Mr. Miller, I'll let you, if you like, answer first.
The answer to the last part of the question is no, it is not. The taxpayer, you and I, are subsidizing CBC to the tune of over $1 billion a year right now. Back when cuts were made in every department except healthcare in government, the CBC didn't get the full 10% cut that they probably should, to be fair with the other one. They're still getting $1 billion. The one thing that a lot of people don't know about the CBC is their ratings are so low that they can't attract advertising, and that's a fact. Do you know that, Mr. Moderator, do I have the floor, or do they?
Yes, please.
One thing that a lot of people don't realize, that Hockey Night in Canada brought in over 70% of all the advertising revenue for the TV portion of CBC. When Rogers Communications, through the system, they made a bid to the NHL for NHL rights to games. CBC no longer has that advertising
Thank you.
ability. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
No problem.
David?
The CBC is sort of the modern equivalent of the CPR. It's the thing that knits us together. And if anybody has gone across this country as I have and listened as I did to this country in the morning, you will know that there is something Canadian that goes right across from sea to sea to sea. I worked... That's of great value culturally. And I worked in the CBC as a freelance writer. I wasn't an employee of the CBC. And I can tell you that the CBC at that time was the only one who was doing Canadian programming, the only one that was reflecting ourselves back to us, as any cultural institution ought to do. The CBC radio is a thing that keeps us together. Now, I'll tell you that the folks in the CBC who have been suffering under these cuts ever since the Liberals are now in a state of disrepair themselves, never mind the equipment. The morale is low, the programming is falling off, and the ability to show ourselves to ourselves is falling off too.
Thank you.
Well, before I became a lawyer, I was a broadcast journalist. I worked in community radio, and I can tell you one thing about the communication system is that communications in this country is about culture. It's about our values, and it's about languages. It's about protecting all of those things, sharing them around the country, and creating a sense of unity, as David talked about, ensuring that this very, very big country is knit from sea to sea to sea, making sure that minority languages and minority cultures and values aren't shoved out because corporate it's not good for corporate TV. Now, the CBC has faced devastating cuts. The Green Party would bring back the funding for the CBC, restore that venerable institution that we all know and love. You know, there's a reason why the CBC couldn't outbid Rogers. No offense to Rogers who's carrying this, but there's a reason why CBC couldn't, outbid Rogers, and it comes down to fundamentals. It's about values and protecting them. I'm sure the Conservatives would love for every Canadian to see Ezra Levant on their TV and have those values plugged into their brain all the time.
Thank you.
Kimberley?
Yeah, I think maybe the main issue is that the current Conservative government confuses public radio and state radio. And, state radio is what you get in the Soviet Union. The Liberal Party, anybody who's been to my office will know that as soon as you come in the door, you see a big banner that says, "We vote CBC." That was one of the first things that went up in our office. I'm deeply committed to the CBC, and a Liberal government would be restoring cuts and actually reinvesting in CBC. They need more money, not less. And before I get cut off, I want to counter this argument that it's about ratings. I am assured by the folks at CBC it is absolutely not about ratings. Their ratings are good. This is about funding.
Thank you. Time for another number.
Last three digits, 167.
Too bad it wasn't the lottery.
You're telling me, as one of the soon-to-be 2 in 7 folks working in the economy, I'm very conscious of my bank account. During the question about immigration, Mr. Miller commented that this government is committed to making sure that the right immigrants join us in Canada. I'm curious as to the candidates' perceptions of what makes the right immigrant and what a proper screening process would be. Does that differ for refugees?
We'll let Mr. Miller answer first.
Once again, Mr. Farmer maybe wasn't listening. Refugees and immigrants are totally two different things. So I think his question was about immigrants.
May I clarify if you don't understand my question?
Sorry?
May I clarify if you do not understand my question?
Well, if you do it briefly.
Yes, certainly. Primarily, I'm responding to messaging from the Conservative Party that says specifically that as well as the proper immigrants, that the proper refugees join us. I have often heard that specifically joined to the religion of the refugee.
I think we're close enough. Thank you.
That's...
Thank you. Janine, could you start the timing over again, please?
It's got absolutely nothing to do with religion. And when it comes to refugees, what I would decipher as the right refugee is that they go through a screening process to make sure that they're not one of the ISIL fighters that came out of Syria. That seems to be the impression, and what we hear from our friends in Europe, that's what they're quite worried about now. And so from that point, that's what you have to do. And as far as immigrants, there's a process you go through here to come to Canada. You got to be sponsored by someone. You got to bring so much money with you, and of course, there's a number of other things. And that's always been that way, and it shouldn't change. And so, you know, being the right refugee or right immigrant has nothing to do with race, color, sex, and nor should it.
Anything on that, Chris?
Well, I mean, the question, who can join the Canadian family, you know, is a very important question. And I think Mr. Miller, again, is when we're asking him, well, who is the right refugee in the Conservative government's, Conservative Party's mindset, then he says, he just sort of casts the question off to process. Well, they just need to go through screening and process, but he doesn't actually answer what is involved in that screening. What is the criteria there? You know, we said it before, again, that this country was built and founded on immigrants, you know. What would the Canadian family look like today if the Conservative government screening criteria, whatever it is, were in place back then? It would be a very, very different looking fabric as we see it today. So we need to remember, come back to Canadian values. Remember that we need to be a country that is open. We need to be a country that is built on equality, and that means not discriminating against people based on their race, color, or their religion, as Minister Alexander pointed out the other day.
Thank you. David.
Well, my grandfather came from, great-grandfather, sorry, came from the Highlands of Scotland and ended up in Perth, Fergus, one of the first settlers there, and immediately set up a distillery. He ran into trouble with the federal government at that time, or the provincial colonial government, and I have to wonder if perhaps he might not have met the criteria if they had opposed the criteria on him. I also can't help but think that how many of us would be here if First Nations folks had the same immigration policy as this government?
Thank you.
Kimberley.
Okay.
David, are you finished?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think on the refugee thing that security concerns is a red herring that is allowing us to stall on having real refugee support for our Syrian refugees. If you remember the child that washed up on the beach, it was a bit of a kerfuffle internationally because it seemed that that family had made application to come to Canada. Now it was I believe a sister or brother of that individual family, but that woman gave up. So what happened was she made application to try to bring her family over. It was convoluted. The forms were returned to her. She gave up, didn't even bother filling out the forms for the family of the little boy who died on the beach. So if that is the process, then I'm going to say that that process doesn't work. The Liberal Party is looking at immigration, saying that family reunification is our top priority in immigration.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a question that was submitted in writing from the audience. How does the Prime Minister justify selling military vehicles to Saudi Arabia, considering their shocking, deplorable human rights record, and he has chastised other nations? So I remind you, I didn't write these questions. So concerning justification of Saudi Arabian sales to Saudi Arabia of military vehicles. And Chris, I'll start with you.
Well, this is maybe a good follow-up question to the last question that was asked. The Conservative government is, as the Prime Minister states, happy to sell $150 million in arms to a regime, the Saudis, that is a known dictatorship, and they know that, but they're happy to call them their military partners. Yet, in the same conversation on international affairs, the Conservative government is happy to bad-talk the UN and talk about how that institution, made up of mostly democratic countries, we should not be so involved with that. And that has led to a bad reputation for Canada in the world, a bad reputation before the UN. No wonder we're not on the Security Council for that. So again, Canada needs to remember the ways in which it's intervening abroad. We talked about the Syrian crisis and how devastating that is on television, yet Canada itself bombed Libya back, and that set off the sort of powder keg that led to the Syrian conflict. We need to envision the ways in which we're doing that, because it comes home to roost.
Kimberley Love.
Okay, so what I'm going to say is that on foreign policy, I think we've got a lot of things confused, and probably we got the first clue when the Canadian International Development Agency was stripped of its autonomy and stuck onto foreign affairs, because the needs of those two organizations should be very different. The Liberal government wants to recommit to multilateral organizations like the United Nations, take our guidance from them. This Conservative government that we've got currently, and this isn't true of Conservative governments in the past, but are contemptuous of the United Nations. That has made everything that we do internationally difficult. We're out there on our own. I've got friends who work for the United Nations who are texting me saying, what the heck happened to Canada? I think we're going to owe the international community an apology on October 20th.
Mr. Miller?
When you have a conflict that's like what's going on in the Middle East, sometimes your bed partners aren't really normal bed partners. And all I can use is the example with Syria. Right now, the modern world, or the Western world, is supporting Assad trying to defeat ISIL. And does that make some people feel uncomfortable, including myself? Yes. But you've got to go there. Saudi Arabia, we all know that what Saudi Arabia's human rights records are, no doubt. But in the whole scheme of things in the Middle East, the UN supports this, and the UN sees them as a friend. You probably know that I'm not a big fan of the UN, simply because we allow people at the table, countries at the table that are run by dictatorships, not democracies, and basically puts them on the same level as a country like Canada, and I don't like that.
Thank you. David McLaren.
Well, to the question, how do we justify selling weaponry to anyone? I don't know whether you know this or not, but with the free trade agreement that we signed, that this government signed with Colombia, allows us, or makes room for us, to sell a whole whack of assault rifles to Colombia, which at one point was the murder capital of the world. I don't see how this is adding to peace. I don't. It's time for us to retool for peace.
And the winner is 171.
My question relates to the national park in Bruce Peninsula. This summer saw unprecedented visitors at our national park, which you would think would be a tremendous thing. But unfortunately, this overwhelming visitation with 10,000 people this summer being turned away from Parks Canada areas resulted in these disappointed people going everywhere in Tobermory, on private property, overwhelming washrooms, overwhelming beaches, garbage everywhere, which caused, in addition to
we need you to get to your question, please.
Tour boats, caused environmental damage and conflict with local residents. When Parks Canada came to the Northern Bruce, they signed an agreement that ensured employment for local people, protection of the environment, and a buffer between visitors and local residents. Would you ensure that these contracts that were signed by Parks Canada would be enforced under your watch? Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
We'll start with Larry.
To your question, absolutely. And the agreement that was signed with the park hasn't always been honored. And for those who don't know what that is, there was an agreement with the Township of St. Edmunds when they signed for to go to a national park that every effort be made to hire 75% of the park's employees from St. Edmunds. Today, it's probably a little bit complicated because it's a larger municipality, including Lindsay and Eastner, but the principle is still there, and the park has to honor that. Up to 25% are supposed to come in from outside. Not supposed to. If they can hire everyone from within that area, they will do it. But quite often, to get, say, professionals in a certain area, there isn't the locals. So absolutely, we have to do that. We have to ensure that the tourism that we build up there, you mentioned tour boats for one example, we can't hurt the tourism part of it.
Thank you. David?
Well, let's remind ourselves that this government cut back park staff. And it wasn't back office staff, as Mr. Harper had said, it was front office people who were meeting the public. So I think we need to, this particular park is more than earning its keep. And yet it has to give back a whole whack of money every year to the other park system. So why don't we just allow that park to keep some money, build up its infrastructure, hire more people, including local people, to take care of the overload, and find ways of streaming off some of the overload into other areas of the Bruce Peninsula. There are other areas. I know that when Cypress Lake is full, the Cape Croker Campground, which is a jewel, by the way, is only half full. So there are ways around this, two things: extend the season and extend the park.
Thank you. Thank you. Kimberley.
Yeah, the Liberal government is very committed to national parks. We want to restore the funding. As people know who live up there, there were severe cutbacks under this past government. We've removed a lot of the interpretive staff. My university co-op term was actually spent developing interpretive centers for the park system. There's an educational opportunity there, and there's an environmental stewardship opportunity in our interpretive centers. And when we got those kinds of roles in our national parks, we're missing an opportunity for education, and frankly, we're putting our environment at risk, something which this woman was kindly describing. So we'll be also, as part of the celebrations for Canada's 150th, having free admission for all national parks in the year 2017. These national parks are owned by Canadians. Many Canadians don't have an opportunity to experience them. So let's get through these issues at the Bruce Peninsula National Park in time for 2017 so we can share what we've got.
Chris.
It's very difficult to maintain or keep an agreement if you don't have the resources to do so. In 2012, Mr. Miller voted in favor of a budget bill that cut 10%, deep structural cuts to Parks Canada, and those cuts have continued since then, year after year. So we need to ask Mr. Miller, why did he support a bill that made such damaging cuts to an industry and an institution in this riding that is so important to its vibrancy, so important to protecting its beauty? Now, Parks Canada, and this is the Green Party's position, we would restore that funding, but not just because we want to showcase how beautiful, national parks are and the beauty of this country, and especially in this riding with our 2 national parks, but because these parks are not just attractions. They are areas where scientists need to do work. So we also need to restore the funding for science in there so that we can maintain our international obligations under the Convention on Biodiversity, because there are other international agreements in the world other than trade deals that are worth keeping.
This is another question that came online, and it's concerning the North American Free Trade Agreement. Canada has had the most lawsuits against it of all the NAFTA nations. Canada usually pays the complainant out of court and does not defend our sovereignty. How would your party handle the investor disputes triggered by the investor clause in NAFTA and all the new secretly negotiated trade deals like the Canadian CETA and especially FIPA? And I'll start with David McLaren.
Oh, free trade, that's a big question. I remember fighting the free trade agreement that Mr. Mulroney wanted to, and in fact did, pass. But, you know, that agreement, that whole fight was on during the election. So we knew the text, we knew what was going on, we could pick sides and we could interpret it for ourselves. These free trade agreements that are coming up now are secret, and we don't know exactly what's in them until the damage is done. And one of the features of free trade agreements, of course, is this investor protection thing. Chapter 11 in NAFTA and other chapters, including the TPP and the FIPA, and they do a great deal of damage to sovereignty. One of the senators down in the U.S. had a chance to look at the text for the TPP and said it's the biggest surrender of U.S. sovereignty he had seen in quite some time. I think that the NDP government would definitely take these things to court and fight them vigorously. We would also make sure, we'd also take a look at the kinds of free trade agreements that we've been signing, and maybe we shouldn't be signing them quite as rapidly as we are.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Well, the NDP has never seen a trade deal they didn't like. It didn't matter.
That's right.
I don't.
We never saw it.
That's right. You never saw one that you liked. The bottom line is, I'll give you one number. I could give you a whole bunch, but trade with China since 2005, exports to China out of Canada is up 181%. And there's a whole bunch of countries in there, India included, where our exports are up. We are an exporting nation. The United States, a big country just to the south of us, has 10 times as many people as we do. So we've got resources. We are a net exporter. We always will be. And trade deals are what gets those products out and around the world. And it gives us things like health care, et cetera, all those things. It's all part of our economy. And if you want to make us a non-exporter, why don't you go and tell every farmer on every side road in this riding that you don't like export? Because chances are some of the products that he produces is heading somewhere in the world.
Kimberley Love.
I think that the problem with trade agreements is an issue of trust with this government in negotiating them. So we'll go back to the process by which they don't include others, they don't consult experts, and they keep it very, very secret. It's very difficult to trust how the trade agreements are going to go. As far as spending all that time in court, it seems to me that you didn't do a very good job of negotiating the thing in the first place if you wind up in court. This particular government has spent a lot of time in court. There's been a lot of billions of dollars, and not just this, but they take the Supreme Court to court on a regular basis. So I would go to the, I do think that we are an exporting nation. We do need these trade agreements. I think, though, that we need a different process by which we negotiate them that is more inclusive and that is driven more by experts than simply, Ed Fast going out there and doing it himself. And we'll get the kind of trade agreements that we need to better communities like this one.
Okay.
Well, this year, as many people know, the GDP had shrank for 2 consecutive quarters, putting this country in a technical recession. And the GDP, as many people know, is the gross domestic product, which describes the relationship between imports and exports. So we aren't always an exporting nation, as those 2 quarters this year showed. The thing to understand about these investor-state treaties is that they're not free trade agreements. Free trade agreements are between countries, and so they have some of those disclosure requirements in them. That's how you can find out why the government never fights and just pays out of court and settles these things right away. But we don't know if that'll be the case under the foreign investment protection agreements as they're known. So there's a veil of secrecy around there that is bad for the public and bad for information, but they're also bad for consumers and producers. And again, the example is that is the Canada-Korea agreement, where 2 weeks after it was ratified, South Korea banned Canadian beef. And what could Canadian beef producers do about that? There was no clause in that agreement, apparently, for them.
Thank you. Geoff is going to give you another number, but I'll say this is the last question because we want to be sure that we keep within our broadcaster's time frame.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator.
Oh,
What does one do if one has a point of information in this meeting?
will the other candidates consider it or not?
If I could comment, I've had a dozen times tonight where I would have liked to have corrected somebody on something, and I didn't. I understand the rules, and I don't get the chance.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, David.
Okay.
So call your number.
The last question?
Yes.
Wow. You've got your work cut out for you. Number 170.
We had 171. There's something with those tickets.
I know.
Well, I don't think we touched on this at all tonight, but it refers to Senate reform or lack of it. And when Mr. Harper became Prime Minister, he promised Senate reform. He did not deliver. And one of the reasons he didn't deliver is because he never meets with the provinces. So my question is to all the candidates, what would their party do about Senate reform?
We'll start with Chris.
Well, you know, if the Senate works properly, you know, I think it could be a venerable institution. We have a bicameral system where we have two chambers. So the problem with Senate reform starts with the people who are being appointed there and the process by which that is happening. The Green Party has not made the same kind of commitment as the NDP to outright abolishing the Senate. There are constitutional problems there. I don't think the majority of Canadians want to go there in terms of having that kind of a referendum, having that kind of a long, drawn-out debate. So we need to respect our institutions, and I think if we begin there by respecting our institutions, respecting the House of Commons, then we will find that there's more utility there than we realize. You know, that is something that I would like to do if I'm elected as a single MP. There's a lot of respect that can be brought back to that office for this riding. And there's a lot of respect that can be brought back to the House if more Green MPs are elected.
Gary.
The gentleman that asked the question, you're right, Mr. Harper did promise to try and reform the Senate, and he did do that. And it's got nothing to do with not meeting with the provinces. First of all, it has to be voted on in the House, and he didn't have support from the Liberal Party, didn't from the NDP either. They want to abolish it. And I will tell you that, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the government, if a vote came up in the House today and I was there to abolish the Senate, I would vote for it, to abolish it. That's how frustrated all of us are with it. I didn't go to Ottawa with any intention that the Senate shouldn't be there. I thought it had a role. I think it still has a role, but a few bad apples have left a bad taste in all of our mouths. And as I said, I would vote to abolish it if it was there, a vote today.
Thank you.
Chris.
On the Senate?
Yeah.
I already answered that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kimberley.
I'm happy.
My apologies.
That's all right.
You want to change your answer?
Okay, on the Senate question, well, for one thing, the Liberals are a believer that the Senate can be an important part of our political process. Among other things, it provides a check on the power of the House of Commons, and we've seen a demonstration in the last 10 years of why that might be necessary. Also, to eliminate the Senate would create a big constitutional discussion with all the provinces. We need to catch up on 10 years of meeting with the provinces, and we've got other things to talk about other than a constitutional issue of abolishing the Senate. A couple of things can be done to reform it. Justin Trudeau did it in a single day as the leader of the third party, more for Senate reform than anybody since Confederation. He simply cut the Senate Liberals loose. They have been appointed for their expertise and their skill. Nobody needs to tell them how to vote. They're free to vote the way they want. They are no longer part of the Liberal caucus. So that's Senate reform. In terms of choosing someone, he suggested a process like the Order of Canada, where a committee decides on merit.
And David.
Well, there's nothing wrong with the Senate that some honorable members wouldn't fix. The problem is the honorable members and the people who appoint them. I thought at one point, a little while ago, that the Senate could be reformed. I remember the days of Eugene, I don't remember the days, but I remember reading his biography of Eugene Forsey. However, I don't think that the Senate can be reformed, not with the people that are in it and not with the people who are appointing the people who are in it. I think we should abolish it. Now, by the way, we had a $25 billion surplus in the auto sector in 1990, but we now have a $19 billion deficit in the auto sector in 2014.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for all your questions, folks. It's time now for closing remarks, and we'll start with Chris.
And each candidate has 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, well, I'll make it very quick because I do have only one goal in mind to be being elected in this riding, and that is to restore honor back to what is an honorable member of Parliament. I think with the kinds of remarks that we're now notorious for around the internet and around the world, that has not brought honor to this riding. A single member of Parliament can do a lot, and I have the advantage of knowing that I would be a member of Parliament in the opposition. A member of Parliament, whatever party they are for, has one job, and that is to hold the government of the day to account unless they're part of this government. Now, Mr. Miller has never been a part of this government, so his job always has been holding the government of the day to account, and I don't think his record shows that he has actually done that. Ask yourselves this and look at his record. He said he wants to run on his record, so look at it. Ask yourselves specific examples of the things that he's done for this community and compare them against the things that have negatively impacted this community, like the parks, like the beef deal. All those things need to be considered.
Kimberley.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but probably not nearly enough. There's a lot of work to be done in this community. I think the last 10 years haven't been very good. The Harper decade has not been very good to Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. We have regular conversations in the Liberal Party about the first 100 days. What are the things that we can fix? What are the things that are going to be a quick fix? What things, like the Canadian Wheat Board, for example, will we never get back? It'll never happen. So I'm looking forward to getting started on the real work. I think that this community of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound needs a fair shot at success. I think our families need a fair shot at success. I think our economy needs a fair shot. And I think our environment needs a fair shot. Those are the three things that I want to take to the House of Commons on October the 20th.
Thank you. Larry Miller.
Thank you. I'm not going to sit here and take pot shots at my other candidates here, like Mr. Albinati likes to do. I'm going to, if re-elected, I'm going to continue my work. I take pride in being open, accessible. Anybody that comes to me with an issue, as I said earlier, it gets dealt with. You have the right to that. But I want to remind you that when you vote, there's only one party up here at this table who continuously and will continue to reduce taxes. We have reduced 160 or more or eliminated them in the last 9 years, and we will continue down that road. So if you want to vote for experience and lower taxes, vote Larry Miller. Thank you.
So Confederation means governing together, doing government together. So we would like to raise people's income to at least a living wage, because we know that more money in people's pocket means more purchases in our neighbors' stores. We would like to provide $15 a day daycare and childcare, because we know that that helps people get out of poverty. We would raise corporate taxes at least 2% and plug the loopholes that corporations use for escaping taxes and that their CEOs use for escaping taxes in order to help us pay for the things that we know we now need. We would stimulate an innovative economy, because we know that innovation and an innovative economy can be done anywhere, including Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to first of all thank the candidates for your candor, for your time, and please thank them. I'd like to also thank you all for coming out tonight. I mean, these wouldn't be any fun if you weren't here. And I'd also like to thank Rogers TV for being here, and for all of the volunteers. There are a lot of people that help to make these nights successful and run smoothly, and they've done a great job, and thank you. And finally, for me, the Meaford Chamber of Commerce is pleased to be part of this event and all events like this. It helps to reflect the mandate of us, which is to promote economic, civic, and social well-being. And remember, it is not only your right to vote, it is your duty. And please, get out, vote, make sure somebody else votes. We want everybody to vote so that the government is the reflection of all the people. And to close it off, here's Trent.
I'd just like to say very quickly thank you to each candidate also. That, you know, consistently the answers were informed and intelligent and thoughtful. So that was wonderful. And you've been a great audience. I didn't have to chastise you too often. And that was wonderful. You know, I'd like to also thank all the volunteers for the parties that come out to these meetings and do the handing out and all of the work at the doors. That's what makes democracy works. You've been a great audience, and I look forward to a great election on October 19. Thank you very much.